"Get your things and leave, Rachel. You're not welcome here anymore." Those were the first words my brother Aaron said to me that afternoon. No hello, no hesitation, just that cold sentence slicing through the air like glass shattering against the floor. I'm Rachel Morgan, 33, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I run a small home decor shop downtown, nothing fancy, but it's mine. I've spent years building it from the ground up. Every candle, every color palette, every late night order. Yet at that moment, standing in the living room where I'd spent my entire childhood, all of that strength felt small. Aaron's voice echoed again. "Did you hear me? You need to go." My parents were sitting on the couch, pretending to be invisible. My mom stared at her coffee cup like it held all the answers, while my dad crossed his arms and said nothing. That silence cut deeper than Aaron's words. It wasn't surprise on their faces. It was agreement. In that instant, I realized I wasn't just being kicked out of a house. I was being erased from my own family story. You ever have a moment like that? When the people who were supposed to protect you suddenly become the ones who break you? Because if you have, you already know the sound your heart makes when it cracks isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the sound of disbelief. I stood there, trying to breathe, but everything inside me twisted. The weight of years of being second best, pressing down all at once. I thought maybe my parents would stop him. Maybe they'd tell him to calm down, that this was crazy. But they just botched. And in that silence, I saw the truth. They'd always been on his side. Aaron's smirk was the same one he wore as a kid when he won something I'd worked twice as hard for. Back then, I used to think if I just tried a little harder, they'd finally notice me. But standing there, I finally understood I could have built an empire, and it still wouldn't have been enough. Still, I wasn't the same little sister who used to bite her tongue. I'd made my own life now, my business, my home, my independence. And what none of them knew was that I held something they didn't expect, a secret buried deep, one that could flip their world upside down. It wasn't revenge I felt stirring inside me. It was something colder, sharper, resolve. Before I could speak, Aaron stepped closer, pointing toward the door. "You heard me. Leave." I wanted to scream, to ask why, but I already knew. Control. It was always about control with him. And somehow, my parents thought letting him push me out made sense. So I grabbed my bag, looked around the room one last time, at the family photos, the worn carpet, the memories that no longer felt like mine. And I walked out. The air outside was cold, but at least it was honest. As I sat in my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I whispered to myself, not this time. Because they didn't know that I'd already uncovered a secret, something that had been hidden for 2 years, a secret that would change everything about this house, and about who really owned it. And before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you thought would always stand beside you? Drop your story in the comments. I read every one. Sometimes sharing what broke you helps you heal, and you never know who else might find courage through your words. If you want to see how this all unfolds, hit that subscribe button, because what happened after that day still feels unreal even to me. That was the day I lost my family, but it was also the day I began to find myself.
When I think about Amber, I don't picture the woman she is now, the one who wears pressed blazers and posts pictures from rooftop brunches in Denver. I picture the little girl who used to chase lightning bugs in our backyard, barefoot, laughing so hard she'd hiccup. Back then, our world was smaller, but it was ours. We grew up in a weathered house on the edge of Richfield, the kind with a creaky porch swing and a chimney that leaned just slightly to the left. Mom used to hum while she made coffee, and Dad would read the newspaper out loud, pretending to be the newscaster. It wasn't fancy, but it was love. When the accident happened, when they were gone in one night, everything changed. Amber was 12. I was 20. I remember standing in that cold hospital hallway, the sound of the vending machine humming beside me, realizing that every decision from that moment on would rest on me. People said, "You're strong, Melissa," as if strength was a choice. It wasn't. It was survival. I sold my car, took extra shifts at the diner, and postponed my art degree, all so Amber could stay in school, keep her friends, pretend that her world hadn't collapsed. I remember her first day of high school. She wanted a new backpack, red with gold zippers. It cost $50, which was half my grocery money that week. I bought it anyway. When she smiled and said, "You're the best, Mel," I believed it was worth everything. Those years were hard, but they were ours. I'd pack her lunches, braid her hair before school, and stay up late finishing homework with her at the kitchen table. She'd fall asleep, and I'd stare at her face, peaceful, untroubled, and think, this is why I keep going. When she got accepted to the University of Denver, I cried harder than she did. I told everyone in town like it was my own victory. I remember saying, "She's going to be the first Carter to graduate college." People congratulated me like I was the proud mom of the year. The first year went smoothly. I mailed her care packages, cookies, warm scarves, handwritten notes. She called on weekends, telling me about her classes, her new friends, the big city lights. I'd listen, smile, and pretend I didn't hear the distance growing in her voice. By her second year, she started calling less. When she did, it was usually about money. "Mal, rent went up again." "Mal, my laptop died." "Mal, I hate to ask, but could you cover this month's groceries?" And I always did. I never said no. I'd wire the money, whispering to myself, "It's just for now. She's building a future." I told myself the same thing when I opened my cafe, a tiny place called Hearth and Grind. The name came from those nights we'd sit by the old fireplace with mugs of cocoa, dreaming about what life would be like when things got easier. Running that shop wasn't easy. I worked 16-hour days, learned to fix the espresso machine myself, and kept track of every bean, every penny. There were nights when I'd sleep in the back room because I was too tired to drive home. But every deposit I sent to Amber's account made it feel worthwhile. She was thriving. She'd send photos, smiling with new friends, posing at parties. I'd look at her glowing face and think, good, she's happy. That was enough for me. Mom's old friends used to visit the cafe sometimes. They'd sip coffee and ask, "How's Amber?" "Oh, she's doing amazing," I'd say, smiling proudly. No one ever asked, "And how's Melissa?" That's the thing about family. You give, and people assume you're okay because you keep standing. But some nights, after closing, I'd sit at the counter staring at the empty tables and think, when was the last time someone checked on me? When Amber graduated, she didn't even tell me right away. I saw it on Facebook, her in a blue cap and gown, arm in arm with friends. I wasn't in a single photo. My chest tightened, but I told myself she'd probably forgot to tag me. Later that week, she called. "Sorry, Mel. Things were crazy that day," she said, her voice light, almost detached. "But listen, I got a job in Denver, marketing firm. Isn't that great?" I said, "That's amazing, sweetheart," forcing a smile even though she couldn't see it. She promised to visit soon. She didn't. Months passed. Her texts got shorter. Her requests didn't. I paid for her first apartment deposit, her new phone plan, even her car insurance. Each time she said, "I'll pay you back soon." She never did. But I didn't care. I told myself this is what big sisters do. I convinced myself love meant sacrifice, even when that sacrifice was my own happiness. Until that night with the message, the one that called me small town boring, I never realized how invisible I'd become.
It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day you never expect your world to shift. I was closing my shop when an unfamiliar number flashed on my phone. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Miss Morgan, this is Daniel Price from the law firm of Everett and Fields.
We're reaching out regarding the estate of Margaret Holloway. My heart stopped for a second. Aunt Maggie. I sat down behind the counter. The smell of candles and cedar filled the air, grounding me. Estate? I asked. That must be a mistake. She passed away 2 years ago. Yes, he said, but her will just completed probate. Miss Holloway named you as the sole heir to her property on Cedar Lane. I remember going completely still. Sole heir? That little craftsman house with the ivy on the porch? The one where she taught me how to sew, how to dream? It was mine? The words didn't sink in until I hung up. Then, all at once, they hit. Surprise, disbelief, a flicker of warmth in my chest. She'd seen me. Even after death, she'd chosen me. That night, I drove to Cedar Lane. The street was quiet, the kind of stillness that holds memories. I parked under the maple tree out front and sat there for a while, staring at the house that had once been filled with laughter and fabric and light. I thought about all the summers I'd spent there, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of her humming. But when I stepped onto the porch, I froze. There was a new lock on the door. Lights glowed from inside. Voices drifted through the window. And then I saw him, my brother Aaron, standing in the kitchen, laughing, with a drink in his hand. For a moment, I thought maybe he was just visiting. But as I looked closer, I noticed moving boxes, furniture, his shoes by the door. He lived there. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house, still shaking. "Why is Aaron living in Aunt Maggie's house?" I demanded. They didn't even look surprised. My dad sighed. "Rachel, that house belongs to the family now. Maggie didn't leave a will." My mouth dried up. "She did," I said. "She left it to me." My mom frowned. "That's ridiculous. Aaron handled everything. He told us there wasn't one." And that's when the truth clicked, sharp as a blade. Aaron had known. He'd lied. I left without another word, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I called the lawyer back, and he confirmed what I already suspected. Aaron had tried to contest the will 2 years ago. He'd lost, and he'd never told me. He'd let me mourn in peace while quietly stealing what wasn't his. I don't think I've ever felt anger like that before. Not the loud, screaming kind, but the deep, shaking kind that burns behind your ribs. That night, I drove back to Cedar Lane. His truck was in the driveway. I waited until the porch light went off before knocking. When he opened the door, he smirked. "Wow, look who finally showed up." "You lied," I said quietly. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Maggie would have wanted this way. You couldn't handle this place." "You mean the place she left to me? The one you tried to steal?" He smirked for half a second. "You don't have proof." "Oh, I do, and you're not getting away with it." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You really think Mom and Dad will side with you?" That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just about the house. It was about control, about erasing me again from the story. I walked away before I did something I'd regret, but inside, something had shifted. The quiet girl they'd all ignored was gone. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to fight back. After that confrontation, I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Aaron standing in that doorway. His smirk, his certainty, the way he looked at me like I was still the powerless sister from our childhood. I tried to tell myself it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe once the truth came out, my parents would finally see reason. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen the look in their eyes, the quiet, unwavering loyalty they always reserved for him. A week later, I got a call from my mom. "Rachel," she said, her voice unusually calm, "you need to stop all this nonsense about the will.
It's tearing the family apart." "Tearing the family apart?" I repeated. "Aaron lied. He tried to take something that wasn't his." There was a long pause. "He's going through a hard time," she said softly. "You don't understand. He made some bad investments. He needs that house." I almost laughed. "He needs the house? It's not his to need." "Sweetheart," she said, and I could hear that old careful tone she used whenever she wanted me to back down. "Sometimes it's better to let things go. You've got your shop, your life. Just move on." And that's when the full weight of it hit me. They weren't just standing by him, they were choosing him, again. Even now as adults, they still couldn't see me as anything more than the spare piece in their perfect family puzzle. I hung up, sat on the floor of my shop, and cried until my chest hurt. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about every moment I'd been invisible, every time they'd brushed off my victories, every time I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace. But the universe wasn't done breaking me yet. 2 days later, I was organizing shelves when Aaron walked in. He looked exhausted, but there was still that sharp edge in his eyes. He dropped a thick envelope on the counter. "You might want to look at this." Inside was a foreclosure notice. The Cedar Lane house was under threat of being seized by the bank. He'd taken out a loan against it months ago, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I felt the room spin. "You used the house as collateral?" I whispered. He shrugged. "Relax, it's just business. I'll fix it." "You took a loan on my house without telling me?" He laughed, like it was all some joke. "Your house? You still think that will means anything? You're living in a fantasy, Rachel." Before I could answer, he turned and left. The bell on the shop door jingled like an ending. That night, I called my parents again. I told them what he'd done, my voice shaking. My dad's reply was so calm it made me sick. "We know," he said. "We helped him with the paperwork." For a few seconds, I couldn't even speak. "You, what?" "He was trying to save his business," my mom added. "We co-signed the mortgage. It's all under control." "It's not under control," I shouted. "That house is legally mine. You risked it for him?" "You're being dramatic," my dad said. "It's just money. Families help each other." Families help each other. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask where that help had been when I was struggling to pay off my student loans, when I was eating cereal for dinner just to make rent. Instead, I just said, "You've crossed a line." And my mom's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the phone. "Don't talk to us like that. You should be grateful. We're even including you in this conversation." That night, I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by papers. The will, the loan notice, old photos from better days. My hands trembled as I realized what this meant. If the bank foreclosed, I'd lose everything Maggie had left me. Her home, her legacy, her trust. Gone. I've never felt so alone. For years, I'd told myself I didn't need their approval. But this betrayal dug deeper, because now it wasn't just emotional. It was real. It was written in ink and debt in signatures that all had one thing in common: my family's name without mine. And yet, in the middle of that hopeless night, I heard Aunt Maggie's voice in my memory, steady and warm. "Don't shrink yourself just because they can't see our light." I wiped my tears and whispered back into the dark, "I'm not shrinking anymore." I didn't know how yet, but somehow I was going to fight back.
The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding heart. My apartment felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was thick with everything I couldn't control. But under all that weight, something else was stirring. A spark. I'd spent my whole life staying quiet, keeping the peace, waiting for someone to defend me. But this time, I realized something simple and terrifying. No one was coming. If I wanted justice, I'd have to fight for it myself. So I started with what I knew: information. I dug through every document I had from the lawyer, reread Aunt Maggie's will line by line, Her words were crystal clear. I leave my home and all its contents to my niece, Rachel Morgan, whom I trust to honor its spirit of creativity and love. It wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration that she believed in me when no one else did. I called Sophie, a lawyer I'd met a year earlier at a local small business mixer. She was the kind of person who didn't waste words, sharp, steady, and honest. When she answered, I barely got 2 sentences in before my voice broke. She let me finish, then said calmly, "Rachel, this isn't over. You just need proof, and we'll get it." That was the first time in weeks I felt my lungs open again. Over the next few days, Sophie became my anchor. She walked me through everything: how to confirm the validity of the will, how to trace the mortgage records, how to document every lie. We met in her downtown office after hours, stacks of files between us, coffee cups going cold as the night wore on. She taught me how to stop reacting and start strategizing. "You're not the victim anymore," she told me one night, sliding a file toward me. "You're the rightful owner. Start acting like it." And I did. I began collecting evidence. I went to the county office and requested property records. Every loan, every signature. That's when the real picture came into focus. My parents had co-signed a second mortgage using the Cedar Lane property after Maggie's will was probated, which meant they'd used a house they didn't legally own to cover Aaron's debts. It was fraud. When I told Sophie, she nodded, her jaw tightening. "That's our leverage. We'll file to enforce the will and notify the bank immediately." Part of me was terrified. Another part, the part Maggie had raised, was steady. I wasn't doing this out of anger anymore. I was doing it out of love. Love for the woman who saw my worth long before anyone else did. My parents, of course, didn't take it well. When they heard about the legal filing, my mom called, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You're suing your own family?" I stayed calm. "I'm protecting what's mine." "Rachel, this is embarrassing. People will think you're cruel." I took a breath. "Maybe they will, but at least I'll know I finally stood up for myself." There was silence, the kind that used to make me feel small. But this time, I didn't flinch. The next weeks were a blur of motion. Documents, hearings, sleepless nights. Sophie coached me through everything, reminding me to stay composed no matter what Aaron's lawyer threw at us. At one point, my brother texted me, "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." I didn't reply, because for the first time, I wasn't scared of him. Late one night, I drove to Cedar Lane again. The lights were off now. The porch, once so full of warmth, looked hollow. I stood on the sidewalk and whispered, "I'm going to fix this, Maggie. I promise." And in that quiet moment, I realized something had changed inside me. This fight wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my worth. My whole life, I'd been told to let things go, to be the good daughter, the understanding sister. But letting go had only ever meant losing pieces of myself. This time, I was done letting go. This time, I was going to win. The hearing room was colder than I expected. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was the tension that hung in the space between us. Me on one side, my brother and parents on the other. For 6 long months, everything in my life had revolved around this moment. The depositions, the court filings, the endless meetings with Sophie. Every time I thought I'd reached my limit, something in me whispered, "Not yet. Keep going." Now, it was almost over. Aaron sat beside his lawyer, his once perfect confidence cracked at the edges. His eyes darted from the judge to me, then down to the table. My parents sat just behind him. My mother's face was pale. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of everything this fight had cost me. Sophie began with calm precision.
walking the court through Maggie's will, the mortgage documents, the forged signatures, the timeline of deceit. She spoke like a surgeon, steady, sharp, leaving no space for argument. Then Aaron's lawyer rose, trying to twist the story, claiming that the house had always been a family asset, that the will was ambiguous, but when the judge asked for proof, he hesitated. He didn't have any. Finally, the judge turned to me. "Miss Morgan," he said gently, "is there anything you'd like to add before I make my ruling?" I stood, heart pounding. "Yes, Your Honor." My voice shook at first, but the truth steadied it. All my life, I've been told to stay quiet, to let things go, to keep the peace. But this house, it wasn't just a building. It was my aunt's belief that I could create something meaningful. And when my family tried to take it, they weren't just stealing property. They were stealing what little proof I had that I mattered. The courtroom went silent. Even Aaron wouldn't meet my eyes. I took a breath and finished. I'm not here out of spite. I'm here because sometimes standing up for yourself is the only way to break the pattern, and I won't apologize for that. When I sat down, Sophie gave me a small nod, that silent kind of approval that says, "You did it." The judge looked through the papers again, then spoke. "The will of Margaret Holloway is valid and binding. The property at 417 Cedar Lane legally belongs to Rachel Morgan." I didn't hear the rest. The sound of the gavel was enough. It was over. For a long moment, I just sat there, numb. No cheers, no tears, just a quiet release, like an invisible weight had finally slid off my shoulders. Aaron muttered something under his breath, gathered his papers, and stormed out. My parents followed, neither of them looking back. Sophie leaned over and whispered, "You won, Rachel." But it didn't feel like victory, not yet. It felt like freedom. Later that week, the sheriff's office served the official eviction notice. My parents were ordered to vacate the house within 30 days. I drove by once, just to see. The porch light was on. Boxes lined the hallway. Through the window, I saw my mom, sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. For a second, I almost went in, but then I remembered all the times I begged to be seen and wasn't. So I drove away. Aaron filed for bankruptcy soon after. The man who once bragged about his real estate empire now worked at a construction supply store across town. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. His downfall wasn't something to celebrate. It was just the inevitable truth catching up. When the final paperwork arrived declaring the Cedar Lane house officially mine, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the signature at the bottom. Maggie's handwriting. My name. Justice. And for the first time in my life, I smiled not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing myself to them. It wasn't revenge. It was balance. Long overdue, quietly beautiful balance. When the court papers finally settled and the noise faded, I found myself standing in front of the Cedar Lane house again. For the first time in months, there were no lawyers, no shouting, no tension, just silence. The porch steps creaked under my feet, the same way they did when I was a kid carrying fabric scraps up to Aunt Maggie's studio. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Empty, but not hollow, like it was waiting for something new. The sunlight streamed through the front windows, landing on the old sewing table where Maggie used to sit. Dust floated in the light like tiny memories. I ran my fingers across the worn wood, and for a moment it felt like she was right there beside me. "You did it," I whispered. And for the first time since she passed, I felt peace. Not the fragile kind that shatters under guilt or anger, but real, grounding peace. I decided not to sell the house. Instead, I turned it into a creative space, something I called Maggie's Porch. It became a small art studio and community workshop for local designers, painters, and dreamers who didn't have a place to start. I used the front room as a gallery for handmade crafts, the kitchen for coffee and laughter, and the back porch for open mic nights and weekend gatherings. At first, it was just a few people: a high school art teacher, a single mom trying to learn photography, a retired carpenter who carved birdhouses. But over time, it grew. The house filled again, not with the weight of family tension, but with creation, warmth, and laughter. One afternoon, a young woman came up to me during a workshop. She held one of the fabric pieces I'd designed and said, "This place feels alive, like it's healing something." I smiled. That's exactly what it's for. Because Maggie had built that home out of love, and now it was giving that love back. Sometimes I still think about my parents. They live in a small condo across town. We don't talk much. The first few times I drove past their neighborhood, I felt a pang of sadness, like a bruise that hadn't faded yet. But over time, the ache softened. I realized forgiveness doesn't always mean letting people back in. Sometimes it just means letting the pain go, so it stops owning you. As for Aaron, I heard he's doing better, working steadily, paying off debts. I hope he finds peace too someday. Maybe when he's ready to see himself without the armor of pride, we'll talk again. But for now, I'm content where I am. The house that once broke my heart has become my home again, not because it was handed to me, but because I fought for it, piece by piece, truth by truth. I host workshops every Saturday. Sometimes when the room fills with laughter and music, I stand by the window and look out at the street, the same one where everything began. And I think, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not loud or triumphant, but quiet, steady, and honest. If you've ever had to fight for your place in this world, I hope you know this. You are not wrong for wanting fairness. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. And if the people who should have loved you couldn't see your worth, that doesn't mean you don't have it. It just means it's time to build a life where you do. If my story resonated with you, share yours in the comments. Sometimes the act of telling your truth is the first step towards reclaiming it. And if you're still standing in the middle of your own storm, keep going, because one day the silence will turn into peace, and you'll finally breathe again.